It was the morning of October 12, 1944, when the maid at El Palacio Apartments in West Hollywood unlocked the door to apartment 203. What she found inside would send shockwaves through Los Angeles. The radio was still playing softly in the background, its cheerful swing music eerily out of place. The lights burned in every room, as if someone had left in a hurry. In the bedroom, the sheets were in disarray, and a lamp had been knocked to the floor. There were signs of a struggle, furniture slightly askew, items scattered. But the most chilling discovery awaited in the bathroom. There, submerged in the bathtub, lay the lifeless body of Georgette Bauerdorf. She was only 20 years old. An heiress to an East Coast oil fortune, Georgette had come west to pursue her dream of acting. In her short life, she had moved in glittering circles, attending dances, volunteering at the Hollywood Canteen, and rubbing shoulders with servicemen, actors, and socialites. She was beautiful, vivacious, with chestnut hair and an irrepressible smile. To her friends, she was a generous soul. To strangers, she looked every bit the Hollywood starlet in the making. But in the dim bathroom that October morning, she was reduced to a haunting stillness. Her silk pajamas were torn, her body bore bruises, and her throat showed the unmistakable signs of strangulation. The killer had forced a towel deep into her mouth, suffocating her. In the aftermath, the murder had left the scene staged in a bizarre tableau, the radio humming, the lights blazing, and Georgette's treasured Oldsmobile coupe missing from the driveway. This was no ordinary burglary. Her jewelry, cash, and valuables were still in place. Whoever killed Georgette had not come for money. They had come for her. Theories swirled almost immediately. Was it a jilted lover, furious over rejection? A stranger who had followed her home after a night of dancing? Or perhaps one of the countless soldiers she met while volunteering at the Hollywood Canteen, a haven for lonely servicemen looking for companionship before shipping off to war. The canteen was a place of laughter and patriotism, but it was also a place of obsession. Women like Georgette, young, glamorous, and kind, often found themselves the subject of unhealthy attention. The newspapers seized on the story with a ferocity usually reserved for Hollywood scandals. Within hours, headlines blared. Heiress slain in West Hollywood apartment. Photographers gathered outside El Palacio, eager for glimpses of detectives carrying evidence bags into the building. Rumors spread like wildfire, about strange men lingering near her door, about a secret love affair, about powerful names who might not want the truth exposed. Because this wasn't just a murder. This was Hollywood in the 1940s, a city where glamour and corruption lived side by side, where the movie industry projected dreams on screen, while behind the scenes, actors and starlets navigated a shadowy world of affairs, backroom deals, and whispered scandals. Georgette Bauerdorf's death wasn't just another crime statistic. It was a story that revealed the fault lines of her era. America was at war. Los Angeles was booming, filled with servicemen on leave, with studios churning out patriotic films, with nightclubs buzzing into the early hours. And yet, under all the glitter, there were dangers lurking. Predators drawn to young women chasing freedom and excitement. The unanswered question still haunts us. Who silenced Georgette Bauerdorf in her apartment that night? Was it an intimate betrayal by someone she trusted, or the random cruelty of a stranger who slipped into her glamorous life unnoticed? One thing is certain. This was not just the murder of a young woman. It was a case that would expose the darkest edges of Hollywood's golden age. To understand the tragedy of Georgette Bauerdorf, we first need to step away from that grim October morning in 1944 and return to her beginnings. Hers was a life born into privilege, yet one that carried unexpected shadows. Georgette was born on May 6, 1924, in New York City. Her father, George Bauerdorf, was an oil magnate whose wealth placed the family among the upper crust of East Coast society. The Bauerdorfs lived in a world of affluence and influence, a world where doors opened easily and expectations of success were high. From an early age, Georgette was surrounded by comfort. Chauffeurs, fine clothes, the promise of an inheritance that could have insulated her from the struggles of ordinary life. But despite her privileged upbringing, Georgette was never content to remain in the background. She had an adventurous streak, a restless curiosity. Friends and relatives later described her as radiant, full of energy, the type of young woman who drew people in with her laughter and kindness. Her education reflected her family's standing. She attended the exclusive Westlake School for Girls in Los Angeles, an institution known for molding the daughters of society into polished young women. The Westlake years were transformative. They exposed Georgette to the glittering promise of Hollywood, a city where beauty and ambition could catapult someone from anonymity to fame. She became enamored with acting, with the glamour of film, with the idea of carving out an identity separate from her family name. When her mother passed away, suddenly and tragically, Georgette was still in her teens. Accounts vary on the exact cause, but her mother's death left a deep imprint on her. For a girl barely out of childhood, the loss was a reminder of how fragile life could be, even for the wealthy. It may have been one of the reasons Georgette threw herself so fully into her social life, volunteering, and later into acting classes. She was trying, perhaps, to fill a void. By the early 1940s, the Bauerdorf family had settled in Los Angeles, and Georgette moved into the El Palacio Apartments, a Spanish-style complex in West Hollywood that was both stylish and independent, a fitting place for a young woman eager to live on her own. She was just 20 years old, still forming her adult identity, but already confident enough to manage her own apartment, her own car, her own busy schedule. Despite her wealth, Georgette had a generous spirit. She wasn't known as spoiled or aloof. Instead, she poured her time into the Hollywood Canteen, a now legendary nightclub created as a haven for servicemen during World War II. The canteen was run by actors Bette Davis and John Garfield, staffed almost entirely by volunteers, many of them young women eager to dance, serve food, and provide comfort to lonely soldiers on leave. For Georgette, the canteen became more than volunteer work. It was a passion. She served meals, danced with men who would soon be shipped overseas, and listened to their stories. To the servicemen, she represented the kindness of home, a fleeting reminder of what they were fighting for. Many later recalled her warmth, how she never acted superior despite her wealth. She danced with everyone, smiled with everyone, and carried herself with a sincerity that set her apart from the more jaded socialites. But beneath the sparkle of her social life was an undercurrent of longing. After her death, portions of Georgette's private diary were leaked to the press. They revealed a young woman who was not only searching for companionship, but who often felt vulnerable in her emotions. She wrote of her desire for true love, of loneliness, of her hopes that one day she would meet someone who could see her beyond her fortune and family name. In those candid words, she was no heiress, no glamorous Hollywood figure, just a 20-year-old woman, tender and unguarded, wanting to be cherished. Her family and friends remembered her as fiercely independent. She wasn't afraid to drive her own car across town, to live alone, to open her apartment to friends. Yet she was also sensitive, impressionable. That combination, confidence mixed with innocence, made her magnetic, but also vulnerable. Her father, powerful and well-connected, undoubtedly cast a protective shadow over her life. But Georgette didn't want to remain in that shadow. She longed to be her own person, to chart her own course. She had money, yes, but she wanted meaning. In many ways, Georgette embodied the all-American girl of the World War II era. She was wealthy but restless, patriotic yet personal in her service, glamorous yet down-to-earth. She danced for soldiers, laughed at parties, dreamed of stardom, but confided her insecurities in a diary that no one was ever supposed to read. Her life was a study in contrasts, privilege and vulnerability, independence and longing. And that duality is what makes her murder so haunting. Because when we look at Georgette Bauerdorf, we don't just see a victim. We see a symbol of an entire generation of young women in wartime America. Women who lived boldly, who gave of themselves, who longed for love in a time of global uncertainty. And for Georgette, that openness to life may have been exactly what drew danger to her door. The evening of October 11th, 1944, began like so many others in Georgette Bauerdorf's life. Los Angeles was alive with wartime energy, music pouring from radios, neon lights buzzing outside bars, soldiers on leave thronging the streets of Hollywood in search of distraction before being shipped overseas. That night, Georgette was seen dining with a serviceman. Who he was remains uncertain. Some witnesses suggested he was a Marine. Others said he was an Army private. She was known to keep company with servicemen, not in the way scandal sheets might suggest, but out of generosity. She had danced countless times at the Hollywood Canteen, and even given rides to soldiers without transportation. She liked to help, to ease their loneliness. That compassion, tragically, may have placed her in the path of someone dangerous. Later in the evening, Georgette left in her car with a uniformed man. Friends would later testify she mentioned giving a soldier a ride. The details blur. Did she know him well? Was he a stranger who charmed her? Did she feel pity for a lonely serviceman? What we do know is that by the time the night ended, she would never be seen alive again. At the El Palacio apartments, neighbors recalled hearing disturbing noises in the small hours of October 12th. One tenant later described hearing heavy thumps echoing through the floorboards, as though furniture was being overturned. Another said she thought she heard muffled cries, like a woman struggling. But in wartime Los Angeles, apartments were rarely quiet. Radios blasted swing music. Servicemen came and went at all hours. No one investigated. Inside Georgette's apartment, violence unfolded. At some point, she changed into her silk pajamas, the pale, luxurious kind that spoke of both youth and wealth. They would later be found torn. She fought back against her attacker. Bruises mottled her body, stark against her skin. She was overpowered. The most chilling detail would come later. Georgette had been strangled, not with a rope or hands, but with a towel forced down her throat, blocking her airway until she suffocated. It was an intimate, cruel method, one that suggested anger or sadistic control. She was also raped. Morning came on October 12, 1944, and with it, a grim silence. When Georgette failed to keep her usual routine, concern stirred. It was the housemaid and her husband, the apartment janitor, who discovered her body. They entered her unit sometime after 11 a.m. and were met with a chilling scene. In the bathroom, Georgette's body lay submerged in the bathtub. The water, still running, created an eerie, steady sound. She was face up, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Her silk pajamas were torn, her skin bore bruises. The towel lodged deep in her throat had been the cause of death. Elsewhere in the apartment, strange details suggested a night of interrupted normalcy. On the kitchen counter sat a half-eaten meal, abandoned mid-bite. In one of the lamps, a light bulb had been removed, perhaps to plunge the room into darkness, perhaps to silence a flickering distraction. Valuables lay untouched. Jewelry, expensive possessions, even cash. This was not a burglary. The motive seemed more personal, more sinister. One more thing was gone: her prized Oldsmobile coupe. The disappearance of her car suggested the killer wanted to make an escape, or at least mislead investigators. The vehicle became central to the investigation. Days later, it was found abandoned near Palm Springs, nearly 120 miles away. It appeared the killer had driven until the car ran out of gas, then simply walked away. The Oldsmobile showed signs of damage, as though driven recklessly. This wasn't the work of a professional criminal. It felt sloppy, rushed, panicked. Whoever had killed Georgette hadn't thought through the aftermath. Today, DNA evidence and digital tracking might unravel a case like this within days. But in 1944, forensic science was far more limited. Investigators dusted for fingerprints, examined fibers, and cataloged the bruises. They had circumstantial evidence but no clear trail. The rape could not be confirmed in a modern sense. There was no DNA to compare. But medical examiners noted clear signs of assault. The towel used to kill her carried no usable fingerprints. Whoever had been in that apartment left behind only shadows. Even the neighbors' testimonies, thumps, muffled cries, couldn't narrow down a suspect. They heard something, yes, but they hadn't acted. And now it was too late. Word of the murder spread quickly. By the next morning, newspapers were splashing headlines across the country. Hollywood heiress slain in bathtub. The details were too sensational to ignore. A 20-year-old oil heiress, glamorous, beautiful, living alone in Los Angeles, murdered in her own apartment. Hollywood reporters swarmed the El Palacio complex. Cameras snapped photos of detectives carrying away evidence. The narrative spun wildly. Some papers portrayed Georgette as an innocent victim, a generous soul who danced with soldiers out of kindness. Others whispered about her independent life, her rides with servicemen, her nights out, painting her as a reckless party girl whose lifestyle had invited danger. The tension between these portrayals fed the frenzy. On one side, the image of the all-American girl, selfless and kind. On the other, a cautionary tale about young women who strayed too far from society's expectations. Both narratives obscured the simple fact. A brutal crime had taken place, and her killer was still at large. The untouched valuables baffled police. Why would a killer leave behind expensive jewelry, cash, and clothing? Robbery was the simplest explanation for many Hollywood crimes, but not here. Whoever attacked Georgette had come for her, not her possessions. The running water added another layer of mystery. Was it meant to wash away evidence? Or had the killer intended to drown her, then changed methods mid-attack? The half-eaten meal suggested she had been interrupted, surprised by her attacker. Perhaps she had let him in willingly. Perhaps he was the serviceman she had been seen with earlier that night. And then there was the missing light bulb. A tiny detail, easily overlooked, but one that investigators noted. Had it been removed during the struggle, or deliberately unscrewed to create darkness? Was it part of a plan, or the improvisation of someone unhinged? The story spread far beyond Hollywood. By mid-October, national newspapers from New York to Chicago carried the case. In the midst of war headlines, the murder of a 20-year-old socialite captivated readers. She was young, wealthy, beautiful, an American tragedy that struck a chord in every household. But the fascination was tinged with unease. If someone like Georgette Bauerdorf could be murdered in her own home, then perhaps no one was safe. The glamour of Hollywood now seemed dangerous, its glittering apartments hiding nightmares behind locked doors. Georgette's death wasn't just a murder. It was a glimpse into the contradictions of wartime Los Angeles. On the surface, the city was a haven of glamour and opportunity, where starlets danced with soldiers before they shipped off to war. But underneath lay shadows, loneliness, desperation, predatory men, and the dangers faced by young women navigating independence in a world not ready to protect them. On October 11th, Georgette Bauerdorf stepped into that shadow unknowingly. By the next morning, she was gone, and her name would forever be tied to one of Hollywood's most haunting, unsolved murders. And yet, as shocking as the crime scene was, it was only the beginning. The investigation that followed would uncover suspects, theories, and wild speculation, none of which would ever fully explain what happened in that dark apartment. The body of Georgette Bauerdorf had barely been removed from her apartment before the questions began. Who would kill a 20-year-old heiress, a hostess at the Hollywood Canteen, someone seemingly with everything to live for? The newspapers printed theories almost as fast as detectives could follow them. Each day brought new suspects, new angles, new whispers. Yet beneath all the speculation ran a steady truth. The case was sliding toward cold, even as the press coverage burned hot. The first suspect was obvious. Georgette had last been seen in the company of a serviceman. Witnesses said she'd dined with him the night of October 11th, and possibly offered him a ride. Others recalled seeing her with a soldier days earlier who seemed overly attached, maybe even obsessed. The Hollywood Canteen, where Georgette volunteered, was filled with young servicemen, many far from home, lonely, vulnerable, and at times uncomfortably fixated on the glamorous hostesses who danced and smiled with them. Some soldiers mistook the hostesses' kindness for romantic interest. Some lingered outside apartments. Some even followed women home. Was Georgette's mysterious companion that night one of these obsessed men? Perhaps he had mistaken her generosity for love, and when rejected, turned violent. The brutality of the murder, the forced towel, the rage evident in the torn pajamas, hinted at deep frustration, even humiliation. A man scorned? Police scoured military records, interviewed men stationed nearby, and traced rumors of a Marine she was seen with. But in 1944 Los Angeles, thousands of soldiers passed through the canteen weekly. Faces blurred, names vanished, and with the war raging, any potential suspect could have shipped out the very next morning, disappearing into the chaos of Europe or the Pacific, never to be traced again. Her diary, leaked in fragments to the press, painted a portrait of longing. In it, Georgette confessed feelings of heartbreak, of searching for real love. One entry described a man she admired but who failed to return her affections. Another spoke of loneliness despite the glittering nightlife. Friends hinted that Georgette had admirers, young men who orbited her like moths around a flame. Some may have been infatuated to the point of obsession. Others, rejected, might have grown bitter. Did one of these rejected suitors find himself in her apartment that night, unwilling to take no for an answer? The diary fed the rumor mill. Reporters seized on her vulnerability, suggesting she was reckless in love, perhaps careless with her heart. But what the diary truly revealed was a young woman yearning for something deeper, caught between privilege and restlessness, independence and isolation. Then there was another possibility, someone who knew her routine. Georgette's El Palacio apartment was chic but exposed. Its Spanish Revival hallways, its communal entrances, meant that anyone who watched her closely could learn her comings and goings. The killer knew enough to tamper with her environment. The unscrewed light bulb suggested forethought. The lack of robbery meant the motive wasn't theft. And the way the body was left, submerged, with water still running, hinted at someone either panicking or ritualistically staging the scene. Could the killer have been another tenant? A janitor? A neighbor who coveted her lifestyle, resented her independence, or simply found opportunity late that night? Rumors swirled that Georgette had once complained of being followed, even harassed. But in 1940s Los Angeles, women's fears were often dismissed. No official report survived to confirm this. Detectives worked the case tirelessly at first. Dozens of interviews, a stack of fingerprint cards, leads pursued across Los Angeles and beyond. But nothing matched. The car, abandoned near Palm Springs, yielded no solid evidence. The towel held no prints. Neighbors' testimonies contradicted one another. Every possible motive, jealousy, lust, revenge, remained speculative. There was no smoking gun, no single piece of evidence to close the circle. Within weeks, momentum slowed. By the time 1945 dawned, the war was drawing to a close. Public attention drifted. and so did the police's urgency. If detectives lost steam, the press did not. Newspapers milked the Bauerdorf case for months. One day, she was described as a saintly girl who gave lonely servicemen rides home. The next, she was a reckless flirt whose independence had invited ruin. This double standard was not unique. In 1947, when Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, was murdered, the same pattern played out. Young women became both victims and villains in the eyes of sensationalist tabloids. Their choices, their independence, their sexuality, real or imagined, were scrutinized and often used to explain their deaths. In fact, some would later draw direct lines between Georgette Bauerdorf's case and the Black Dahlia murder. Both were unsolved. Both involved beautiful young women in Los Angeles, and both sparked media storms that sexualized their victims. Another haunting theory lingered, that her killer had been a serviceman who vanished into the war. It was wartime, after all. Millions of men were constantly moving through bases, ships, and battlefronts. If a soldier killed Georgette on October 11, 1944, and shipped out the next morning, he may have died in combat weeks later. Or he could have returned home, living out his days under a new identity, his crime buried with him. This possibility gave the case an aura of futility. How could Los Angeles detectives ever solve a murder if the suspect was already across the ocean, or in a grave at Normandy? Behind the scenes, whispers suggested another influence. William Randolph Hearst, the media titan. Hearst was said to have been a close friend of Georgette's father. Some rumors even claimed that Hearst used his considerable influence to soften or suppress aspects of the case. The theory went like this. George Bauerdorf, powerful but private, did not want his daughter's personal life dragged through public scandal. Georgette's independent habits, her late-night outings, her rides with soldiers, her romantic entanglements, could tarnish the family name if exposed in detail. Hearst, sympathetic, allegedly leaned on his network of editors and contacts to cool down the investigation once it became clear that sensational revelations might surface. There's no conclusive evidence of this, but it is true that after an initial flurry of coverage, the case seemed to fade unnaturally fast for such a high-profile murder. By the end of 1945, the Bauerdorf murder had slipped into the shadows of unsolved Los Angeles crimes. Her family, shattered, eventually left the city. Her father never publicly commented in depth, preferring silence to speculation. But the mystery remained. Was it the obsessive serviceman from the canteen? A jealous suitor? A neighbor who knew too much? Or someone higher up, someone shielded by influence? No theory fully explained the contradictions of the crime scene. The untouched valuables, the staged details, the missing car, the intimate cruelty of the killing. And so Georgette Bauerdorf's murder endures as one of Hollywood's earliest, eeriest unsolved tragedies. An open wound in the city's glamorous history. Despite the floodlights of national attention, the investigation into the murder of Georgette Bauerdorf dimmed almost as quickly as it had flared. For a few weeks, her name was on the front page of newspapers from Los Angeles to New York. Heiress slain in Hollywood bathtub. Radio commentators speculated, gossip columnists hinted, and police detectives issued vague promises of progress. But as autumn turned to winter, leads dried up, suspects vanished, and the press moved on to the next sensation. No one was ever arrested. No one ever stood trial. Georgette's grieving father, George Bauerdorf, refused to accept that the official channels had failed. A wealthy oil man with influence on both coasts, he poured his own resources into private investigations. Former detectives, military contacts, even journalists were quietly hired to pursue any shred of evidence. Yet all roads led nowhere. The car, once thought to be the crucial key, yielded no fingerprints of value. The mysterious serviceman who had dined with Georgette that last night seemed to evaporate into the fog of wartime Los Angeles. Potential witnesses, neighbors, fellow hostesses at the Hollywood Canteen, either contradicted each other or faded from the record. And so, within months, the case that had shaken Hollywood grew cold. Why did the trail vanish so quickly? Part of the answer lies in the era itself. Forensics in the 1940s had severe limitations. There was no DNA testing, no advanced chemical analysis. At best, investigators relied on fingerprints, shoe impressions, and circumstantial reconstructions. Complicating matters further was the sheer transience of wartime Los Angeles. Soldiers came and went in waves. Many were shipped overseas with little documentation of their movements. A suspect today could be fighting on the front lines tomorrow, vanished beyond the reach of police subpoenas. And then there were societal attitudes. A young woman living alone, inviting servicemen into her car, attending Hollywood parties. Too often her choices were seen as reckless, even culpable. Victim blaming infected the case. Detectives, reporters, and the public alike sometimes framed Georgette as a naive socialite who had brought danger upon herself, rather than an innocent woman murdered in her own home. That bias may have dulled the urgency of the search. Still, the story refused to vanish entirely. In hindsight, many historians see Georgette Bauerdorf's unsolved murder as a grim foreshadowing of later Hollywood tragedies. Just 3 years later, the Black Dahlia case would explode onto the headlines. Another beautiful young woman slain, another city scandalized, another mystery left to rot in silence. To some, the parallels are too close to ignore. And yet, beyond theories and comparisons, what lingers is the human cost. Georgette Bauerdorf was 20 years old, vibrant, generous, restless. She dreamed of a future that was stolen in a single violent night. Her murder remains unsolved, but her story lives on, in the pages of old newspapers, in the whispers of Hollywood lore, and in the minds of true crime storytellers decades later. She has become not just a symbol of glamour colliding with danger, but of beauty, youth, and injustice, an echo of 1940s Los Angeles that refuses to fade. Before we end, I want to leave you with a question. How much responsibility did the press place on Georgette herself, rather than the man who murdered her? In the aftermath of her death, headlines focused less on the brutality of the crime and more on her personal life, her independence, her wealth, her social circle, her supposed recklessness. The tragedy is that Georgette's voice was silenced, and yet the world judged her anyway. It's a reminder that while decades have passed, the issues remain familiar. Victim blaming, stalking, and sensationalist media coverage are not just relics of the 1940s. They are struggles we still face today, in different forms. If you found Georgette's story haunting and want to hear more forgotten Hollywood mysteries, let me know in the comments. Which unsolved case should we uncover next?